Okay, so this is the podcast you have all been waiting for, especially if you are a landlord, an aspiring landlord, or perhaps maybe even a tenant or somebody looking to rent out their first property. So much to unpack here. We have from Fox Marin, none other than Sean Bridge. Sean is our leasing specialist at Fox Marin. My name is Ralph Fox. I am the co-founder and broker of record of Fox Marin. We want to welcome you to the Toronto Real Estate Podcast. Please be sure to hit that like or subscribe button. And if you have any comments down below, please be sure to ask away, because we'd absolutely love to hear from you as long as it's constructive. It can be positive or negative. Just all we ask for is constructive comments. So this is going to be really interesting because our team, we work with a lot of investors. We do a ton of leases for better or for worse at Fox Marin. I think last year we capped out at about 150 or something like that by the end of the year. So in that range. And Sean works specifically with landlords, and he works on the rental side. So he is an expert when he has basically seen it all when it comes from the landlord or leasing perspective. And he is here today to talk about some of the things to watch out. It's pretty scary out there as to some of the paperwork and some of the levels of desperation that people are trying to pass off. And we're going to get into it. So, Sean, so glad to have you here.
Thanks very much, Ralph. And I'd like to add, we were just shy of 150 leases last year, but to date so far, we're just shy of 50 for our team. So we're absolutely crushing it this year.
And you know what you're talking about when it comes to leases?
I'd like to think so.
I'd like
Absolutely.
I'd like to think so as well. Well, I'm just so happy to have this conversation because it's really, really, really important to be able to know when you're looking at forged documents or not, and to get a sense of is this tenant or application the right one for you? Because you would not believe some of the things we see coming across our desks and computer screens. And this is just from our vantage point. I can only imagine what is happening in the greater marketplace. So, at a high level, Sean, what are you seeing right now in the rental market? Knowing that we work mostly in central and downtown Toronto, what's the word out there?
Yeah, so rental market currently, we're just coming out of the slow winter market, which is it's very typical of the Toronto market. It's
Mhm.
very cyclical. Rents across the board are roughly down about 10% overall.
Yeah,
So not the best for landlords. We're expecting that the spring market, things are going to pick up a little bit though. And we are starting to see that a little bit more now.
we're seeing more activity on our listings. Are we seeing more showings, more offers?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And what are some of the biggest challenges right now representing landlords, or that landlords are facing in this current rental landscape?
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges right now is finding good tenants.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot of, we're going to talk about this later, but a lot of fraud documents, a lot of tenants with really bad um, credentials, and they have they shouldn't be renting what they're applying for, essentially.
And sometimes they are trying to position themselves as something different from most likely what they are. And that's a
Yeah,
real concern.
absolutely. We're going to again talk about this more later, but when you have a bad tenant in your suite,
Mhm.
getting them out, on average takes about a year, if not longer.
Exactly. And so the stakes are very high if you're a landlord, because if you're stuck with a tenant who's not paying rent, the costs can be upwards 20, 30, 40, $50,000. So you have to be really, really careful. And it's one of the things I always talk to with our clients, and I know you do as well. It's most often less about the amount of rent that you get every month and far more about the quality of the covenant of the tenant. And the reason, going back to what you were alluding to, Sean, is that with the landlord and tenant board, or it can take, or tribunal, I should say, dating myself here, with the tribunal, it could take literally a year just to get a hearing. And even then, they can be adjourned and postponed. And there's a lot of professionals out there that actually make a living by living for free off of a lot of unsuspecting landlords. And so you're very exposed in an environment, if you are a landlord, where the tenants have way too much rights. And I think things are skewed far too much in the tenant's favor. And so by being a landlord, it puts you in a really difficult position. And that's why landlords are, and rightly so, so picky about who they actually rent to, because once they gain entry to that property, they could be there for a long time, for better or for worse. So it really is about the quality of the covenant of the tenant. And if you're a landlord, if you're a rental agent, if you're thinking about renting a property for the first time, or maybe you're an experienced renter, the one thing that should be going through a landlord's mind is what is the covenant of the tenant, and how can I do my own due diligence to protect myself and mitigate any of the potential risks that are out there for being a landlord. Does
Yeah,
that make sense?
that's super well said, Ralph. Absolutely. There's this term that's become popular over the past few
Mhm.
years, and it's a professional tenant. And you're completely
Yeah.
right. They bounce from suite to suite, paying their first and last month's deposit only. And then once the second month rolls around, they stop paying. And
Awful.
landlords are stuck with them for a year, if not
Awful.
longer. Yeah.
Awful, awful, awful. So, Sean, like, what would the proportion of fraudulent documents or suspect documents, because of some of them are, I'm sure, more of a gray area, but what would you say, how much of the applications or offers to lease that you see coming in are gray area or fraudulent versus the ones that are actually honest?
Yeah, so I would say, this is just a rough number.
Yeah,
Haven't never crunched the numbers
anecdotally.
personally.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say about 1 in 20 currently. Um,
Okay.
but of course, that number is skewed because we're working mostly with realtors. And most of the time, realtors will have some sort of professional working relationship with their clients.
Mhm.
So they have, some understanding and knowing that their clients aren't fraudulent in any way. Versus if you're just doing something on your own, if you're a private landlord renting through, Kijiji or Facebook Marketplace, for example, I would imagine that number to be quite a lot higher.
Wow. Well, 21 and 20 is a lot, because it's not uncommon to see 510 offers on a lease listing in Toronto before the offer actually gets accepted. So, and we've seen clients reject. How much is the most rejections we've seen on offers on a property to rent this year? Would you say?
I think we got to 15 or 16 for one.
Crazy,
Yeah.
crazy. So it's really important to do your due diligence, because there's a lot of fictional paperwork, to put it mildly, out there. And Sean is going to take us through some examples. Sean, do you want to take us through some examples? We've redacted all of the documents to protect the identity or the supposed identity of these documents. But Sean, why don't you walk us through? Because this really, really, really is interesting, and it's a real life example of the type of fraudulent documents we're seeing. And Sean, it might be helpful as well, as you go through this, to explain what the red flags were and what the tip offs were, because I know you're really a big font guy.
I am. Yeah.
Yeah.
I've watched documentaries on fonts. That's super nerdy, I know,
Yeah.
but I love them.
Talk to us. Let's go.
Yeah, so again, like Ralph said, I've redacted a lot of the information on this, and
Of
I've
course.
only pulled out certain specific parts of each file just to kind of show everyone the parts that I picked up on. So the first thing that I pulled out was a credit report from a client that we received an offer from in January, so not too long ago. Very first tipping point for me was the request date up at the top right corner. You can tell that the font is a little bit different from the rest of the
Mm,
Equifax font. And
interesting.
if we zoom in on them, you can see right at the corners of the numbers, there's just a little bit of
Yeah.
a dash. It's not completely
Okay.
straight versus Equifax fonts. They're all very straight, very angular.
Okay.
And then same thing. So we can see that on the phone number. We can see it on the reported address dates that they were there. And then scrolling down a little bit farther, we can see in the credit section for their first BMO credit card, um, there are some fraudulent or some different fonts on the page here. And one thing I notice is At the very bottom, under the delinquency section, it says you currently have no delinquencies on your credit file. Now, this is a pretty convincing looking font, but you'll see on the second credit report, the F and the I on file are actually connected on the legitimate font. So for this first credit report, they aren't connected. And then going to the very last page of this credit report, you can see right on the far right side for January 2024, there is a past due amount. So there would be a delinquency on this file. So that's what they've changed and edited out. Second credit report, same thing. So you can see some different fonts here, mainly in the credit limit, mainly in the balance and the reported dates. Going down into the second page of the credit report, you can see all the $10,000 limit here is just a little bit askew. And again, you zoom in really, really close to the dollar sign. The dollar sign for the $10,000 credit limit is slightly different than the dollar sign for the balance for the 8,520.
Wow.
So tiny little minuscule details like that I pick up on, and right away that's a huge red flag that they've changed something. There's something suspicious that I should be aware of.
Okay. And in a situation like this, do you come back and ask more questions, or do you just outright reject?
I outright reject. If
Okay.
somebody is not willing to be 100%, 100%, um,
Honest?
thank you.
Yeah.
If someone's not willing to be 100% honest with us, then that is a red flag. I'm not
Honest.
willing to consider working with a client like that.
Okay. And let's go on to the third one.
Yeah, so third document. This is the employment letter that I received for one prospective tenant. You zoom in and you can see that all the font everywhere is really, really blurry. It's really, it's not good quality. You can see
Mhm.
on the company logo, again, it's really pixelated, not very good quality. But then under the date that the employment letter was pulled, you can tell that that font is really crisp and clear.
Mhm.
So on Mac computers, the default program to
Whoa.
view PDF files is called
Yeah.
Preview.
Okay.
And that will actually save some information when you're doing some edits to it.
Mhm.
So when I pulled up this credit report, I saw that there was a change in my cursor between the date, December 24, 2024, and then I saw a little tiny little pixel right above that. And I clicked on it, deleted it, and I actually saw that that employment letter was from September 4th, 2024.
Wow.
So they're hiding, potentially when they are employed with this company.
Wow. 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 Okay. Super interesting.
Yeah. And then going into the pay stubs for that same tenant
Mhm.
for the employment letter, um, same sort of thing. So you check out the dates, and the dates look pretty legitimate. They have them for November 15th, November 30th. But again, I saw tiny little pixels at the top right corner, clicked on it, deleted, and you can see that the pay stubs were actually for September 30th, for example.
Wow. Good
So
eye.
yeah, people trying to hide these weird little things. Um, I didn't dive too deep into this prospective tenant because again, once I see that there's some sort of fraudulent behavior, I just outright decline because I'm not willing to work with clients like that.
Mhm.
It could have been that they still work with that company and maybe they just had taken some time off and were providing some, you know, pay stubs for November, or it could have been that have been fired from that company. Who knows? Second set of pay stubs. These ones again look really convincing. You can tell just flipping back and forth between them.
Mhm.
Majority of the information doesn't change until you get to some of the numbers. And then once you start flipping back and forth between the different pay stubs,
Mm.
you can tell that the numbers just change slightly in orientation or slightly in direction. So that's a big flag to me that, something's not adding up. And then on top of that, I added up a few of the numbers and the numbers didn't add up.
Yeah, that's a big tell.
That's a huge tell. I think
Always add
everyone,
up the numbers if you're suspicious.
exactly. Here's the thing. Everyone has a calculator.
Mhm.
How was this missed when you're photoshopping it? I don't know.
Interesting. Okay, and is there one more?
There's one more. This one is quite fun to look at. On the second page of the pay stubs, you can see there's a whole bunch of little marks where they may have changed things or photoshopped things. You can tell by zooming in, the line that they put in are crooked. Um, the numbers are in weird spots. There's two different decimals for one number. Weird little bad Photoshop skills.
Wow. And 1 in 20, you're seeing this kind of paperwork.
Yeah, roughly about 120.
Okay, well, thank you for walking us through that because I think people just think if it says ADP or Equifax on it, then it has to be legit. And I've seen that there's like websites or Facebook groups where for like $350, they will actually make packages for you. And we've had experiences where you've called the company and it's like it's a fraudulent company. Like, do you have any examples to talk about that?
Yeah, so we had an offer, I think this was back in October or November. Company just seemed really suspicious. So we Googled the address, Googled the phone number. The address was for a condo in North York. The phone number wasn't associated with anything. There was no website for the company, all just huge red flags. So we go to and contact the phone number that's listed. I always like to call after hours and just listen to what the
Yeah,
voicemail message says
smart.
just to see what it says. And it should be the company,
Yeah,
but this particular phone number, no outgoing message. So again, huge red flag. Called the next day, talked to the supposed CEO, and just had really vague answers for everything. Couldn't really even describe what the company was or what they did.
that's a tell.
Big red flags. Absolutely.
Yeah, I remember a situation where we had something that was really fishy, and it was for a client of mine in Corey. This was years ago. And we drove by at like 11 o'clock at night the location of the office, which it had like, it was like a Richmond and Spadina location. And then we go and we see a pizza shop and then like a dojo or something above it. So, it's really important to do your due diligence. There was another story. This might have been before your time, Sean, but some of the agents on our team were dealing with this one, which I just thought was so interesting because it was an older woman and she had sold her home. And I think she was working for the city, might have been as a librarian, something like that. And we called just to confirm, members of our team called just to confirm how much her salary was. And it was different from the letter that we received. So the person from HR from the city confirmed that it was actually her signature, but she said I can't confirm that
Mhm.
amount. It's a different amount. So they doctored the amount right on the form, which is just unbelievable.
Unbelievable, but it happens more often than you would imagine,
And I
right?
guess in an expensive city like Toronto, and you have a recession happening right now, or on the verge of one. There's a lot of people out there who sometimes also, I guess, maybe they might have the income, but they might make it from nefarious means that may not be legal or something that they could put on paper. And so sometimes they might be able to pay the rent and they might actually be potentially good tenants, maybe the risk goes way up, but oftentimes it can be they just don't report income. We've seen situations like that as well where they have a good stream coming in. It's just they don't report it to the CRA and then they go down this path. But irrespective, when you're trying to mitigate the risks of your buyers and sellers, sorry, of your landlords, you really, really want to be careful in terms of who you're letting into your property. And obviously, if somebody's coming in with fraudulent documents, you're pushing your luck a lot further than you probably need to. What are some other advice that you could give to agents or landlords, just at a high level in terms of doing due diligence? What are some? I mean, we've gone through the paperwork and we've told some stories, but what are some other things that an agent or landlord can do in terms of due diligence to protect themselves from these type of situations or tenants?
Yeah, so if landlords and agents have the time, uh, be contacting everyone and speaking to everyone verbally and
Yeah,
not just relying on what's being sent to you, because we've seen it can be fraudulent and it can be done fairly well too. If you don't have time to, you know, put in and do your actual due diligence, then work with a realtor who can. Because, you mentioned earlier, this is 20, 30, 40, $50,000 worth of missed rent potentially, and under this constant headache of trying to get these tenants out for over a year with the landlord tenant board. So really is such an important thing for landlords to do properly.
Okay. And have you seen any other examples or situations that might be interesting to share?
I don't think so, actually.
We've had situations where somebody put in a bad tenant, and the police ended up having to take a battering ram down the front door of the property. I mean, if you've been doing this long enough, you've seen it all, and so the worst thing you could do, I would think, as a landlord, especially if you're not a professional landlord and you're a first-time landlord, is to try and do it yourself. There are so many little tricks like looking for fonts or weird vibes on follow-ups, or when to do your due diligence, or when to look on social media and follow up there. There's just so many nuances to it, and it goes back to the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, where you just developed an instinct because you just see so many documents and so much paperwork. And also along way, who is the agent? Is it somebody who has a great reputation and they work a lot downtown, or is it somebody coming from way outside the city who's not a good communicator? Then your anxiety levels as an agent or landlord can go up if you're questioning a lot of the documentation that you've received.
Oh, absolutely. There's tens of thousands of realtors, just in Toronto alone,
Mhm.
and you come across a few that are bad eggs, and then there's others where I've worked with multiple times now, and I know, this is a good realtor. They're bringing me a quality tenant. I'm going to rely on their word a little bit heavier compared to somebody else.
Yeah, it's definitely not for the faint of heart to be a landlord or realtor in the city, especially these days with all the issues we see floating around out there. And Sean, I really want to thank you so much for sharing these examples. If you're watching this, please comment below. Like, as I'm thinking about it, share your stories. If you've had any of these similar type experiences, we'd absolutely love to hear from you. And one of the other things as well that just came to mind is that it's really good. I'm a big proponent of face-to-face meetings, and I'm a big proponent of Zoom calls before you actually sign a lease. And I'm always willing to give, as a landlord, somebody a shot if their credit isn't 100% perfect, or they aren't 100% perfect on paper. If they appear to be, somebody worthy of giving a chance to, and somebody who, you think that could be a good person and just maybe have had a little bit of a difficult patch. So I think there's some things that you can work around. I don't think it's necessarily always so cut and dry, but definitely, definitely, definitely always go in eyes wide open, because the stakes are so high. So please share your stories down below. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you can get more details and information about the Toronto rental market or real estate market. We have a lot going on our YouTube channel here at Fox Marin. Sean, thank you so much for joining us. I think this conversation was awesome. I think a lot of people watching it will benefit from some of the little details and tidbits that you had to share here today. So thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
Thanks, Ralph. They can find me all over the Fox Marin website. You can find me on Instagram at realtor.sean. You can find me out in the wild of Toronto doing showings all the time.
Amazing. Sean, thank you so much for joining. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thanks very much, Ralph.